Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Jimmy McClellan, and I serve as the director of the Coalition of Urban Serving Universities, or USU. We're excited to host this conversation focused on local government, research, and development, and through the survey that was conducted with MetroLab at the Federation of American Scientists. We're excited to see what that reveals about universities and how cities are aligning or not around shared priorities. Universities play a critical role in supporting cities, and this work really sits at the intersection of research, place-based impact, and community engagement. That's why we're glad to partner with MetroLab Network at the Federation of American Scientists and invite colleagues from USU as well as the APLU Council on Research and Commission on Economic and Community Engagement to join us today. So thank you all for being here. I had the chance to get a little bit of a sneak peek at the data that's going to be presented today during a recent USU Advisory Council meeting, and it really underscored how timely and relevant those findings are. So I'm excited to dig in a little bit further. We're pleased today to be joined by Kate Burns, the Director of State and Local Innovation at the Federation of American Scientists. Kate is also a member of the USU Advisory Council, which fits well with today's focus on strengthening connections between urban serving universities, research, and the priorities facing cities. Kate will walk us through what city leaders say is working in their collaborations with universities, where challenges remain, and how institutions can better connect research, expertise, and talent to community needs. We'll save some time for questions at the end, but feel free to drop any questions that you have as we're moving through the conversation today into the Q&A chat, and I'm happy to kind of compile those and we can talk about them at the end. But with that, I will turn it over to you, Kate.
Jimmy, thank you so much, everyone. It's great to be here. Really, really love and appreciate being a part of USU and their mission. It is very aligned with MetroLab and now FAS. So the presentation I'm giving today is very much a preview. This is the first time we're giving the full results, and we are going to publish the report, which is now about 60 pages in total, in 2 weeks. So I'm very excited to do that. So I'm going to share my screen for a moment. Jimmy's going to keep me. Oh, I need to send a request to Jimmy really quick to share it. But Jimmy's going to keep me honest here on whether or not my Google Share works. Perfect. Thank you. That was it. Okay. So a little bit about FAS if you are unfamiliar. We are in slideshow. Okay. Your screen sharing is paused. Let's see. Every time. Resume. My gosh, let me try one more time here. There we go. I think it's blank. Let's see here. We will figure this out, and I will continue to tell you about FAS. FAS is an 80-year-old organization. We're a nonprofit in Washington, D.C. It was started by Oppenheimer and Einstein after they invented the bomb. And it was in the vein of making sure that scientists could be more involved with policymaking. Myself, my team, as Jimmy mentioned, with MetroLab Network, we joined FAS by way of acquisition, and we did that last summer. MetroLab was formed in 2015 as a town gown nonprofit with a bunch of mayors and provosts and university presidents signing letters together to work together on emerging technology. I myself was a part of the network. Okay, there we go. I'm just going to stay here so it works somehow. As I was in the mayor's office in Seattle and Kansas City. So at MetroLab and now at FAS, we really wanted to think about understanding the research needs and knowledge gaps of local governments, but we also wanted to understand the ecosystem between as universities work with cities and counties. So we received a philanthropic grant to develop a local government R&D agenda. Why do this work? One, our hypothesis is that the demand for research on the local government side is not well known. It certainly is not well known at scale. And so research is often just handed or given without being asked to local governments, immediately changes the sort of use and relationship between those two institutions when that happens and it's not asked for. And the second is from the supply side, or when research is done and finished, how can it better go into the world and be acted upon and go from observation to recommendation? So this is squarely where we are living, is in the demand and the supply of research. And that's what the civic research agenda squarely is taking on. We will identify and list the priority research needs of cities and counties across the country. That's what I'm going to share with you today. And then we also studied the perception, the friction points for these two institutions to work together, and recommendations, both from a per project basis, but as well from a larger macro ecosystem that can federal agencies, Congress can look at and work on. We knew this was a hard task in front of us. We wanted to make sure we had a steering committee. So we had folks from organizations, including APLU, National Association of Counties, and the National Science Foundation on board with us from the beginning to help guide and steer what we were doing so that we could represent as many local governments as we could. Our methodologies to my research community, which we know is very important, are several. First of all, we had two surveys. One was the MetroLab survey, and the other was in partnership with the National League of Cities and did a pulse survey with them. From the survey, we got 167 responses covering 37 states across the country. The responses were made only by local government staff and leaders. We also went to 9 communities across the country. There was always hosted at the university, and it was led in partnership primarily with the local government as the starting place. And we really wanted to have as many unique departments represented in the room, as well as faculty experts to vet sort of the research questions that we were garnering from this group. It has to make sense to the university side as well. And so we went to 9 in-person locations to do a half-day workshop. So our results today that we could share with you of the biggest research needs of cities and counties, the number one by far and away is on housing. The following policy areas of research needs, the remaining policy domains, there's 7 total, 6 underneath housing, are all priorities, but they're really not significantly distinctive enough to have a order of the policy domains beyond housing. So it's housing, economic development, human services. That includes things like public safety, public health, education, climate and energy, transportation, community engagement, and service delivery, or the services that the local government delivers themselves specifically. This is a snapshot from our survey of when we asked them what university research can have the most impact. And you can see from this, housing and homelessness is by far and away number one here, and that corresponded with our in-person convenings. We also heard a lot about neighborhood revitalization and community planning. And we're going to dive into that a little more deeply into the specific research questions that came out of it. And so I wanted to show you the priority research questions for each policy domain. It will give you a sense of how these local governments think about their work and how they can ask for more information from the university and research community. So I hope that you look for certain language that they're using, the way they describe what they need. We have chosen to list the research needs based on how cities and counties are typically organized, rather than the way that universities are typically organized. So there's no sort of top engineering, sustainability, geo research questions. It is really based on the typical department structure within local governments, and that is intentional. I will highlight the priority research questions here for you, but know in the coming report, there are a total of 432 research questions that we will list. We will divide it into 7 research agendas. So there will be a research agenda for each of these specific policy domains. So if you know of a dean or specific school that really just wants to hone in on one of these policy areas, we will just have a research agenda that can do just that. So for housing, obviously housing affordability by far and away is the number one. And it's often thinking about long-term effects. We held a in-person workshop in Houston, and we only had the specific policy domain of housing. It was the only time that we did this, that we used an in-person convening to hone in on a specific area. It was an incredible convening. We had a judge who does oversees evictions in the room. We had state elected staff in the room. And there were questions of, are these interventions just kicking the can down the road? Or, are they taking care of someone now and also later? There were also a lot of questions around everything around housing and individual mobility is what we're calling it. So that can an individual make these certain types of payments, whether it be a deposit, a down payment, or making sure they're not evicted and losing their home sort of payment, and what creates those opportunities for economic mobility to do that. For economic development, sorry, this is a little smaller font, but we had a lot of really good questions here as well. And this is the policy levers that a local government can do themselves to help generate people to move, whether it be from over 50 miles or understanding what the policies and trends are of people moving from one neighborhood to another in their own city. And those are some of the things that we saw here, like how can we optimize land use to balance our other sort of values or economic competitiveness? How can we evaluate whether the workforce development programs that we're investing in are actually doing the output that we want to see and why we're investing in them in the first place? Life cycle costs of growth across jurisdictions. A lot of requests, especially with economic development, I think, for peer to peer comparisons. A lot of requests for cities or counties that were one political affiliation that lived in a state that was a different political affiliation and what levers that they might have at their disposal. The top questions, research questions for human services by cities and counties. Again, this is a large, large bucket, but there was a huge focus on early childcare needs and understanding with granularity what sort of demand there is. There's generally, I think, a lack of understanding of how many kids are not going to daycare because there wasn't a spot for them, as well as sort of those specific costs. Um, I think this is where we see some education questions. There is a varying degree of how much control a county or city has over their schools, but they have a lot of external factors that can impact student success, which is often a local government elected's priority. And so they wanted to understand what sort of levers can we use there. Mental health and physical health, both sort of, again, as specific as possible to that neighborhood, also specific interventions with respect to mental health. There was a big demand on mental health, I will say, as especially with cities, there's often not a department of mental health. And yet it impacts so many outcomes for residents within a city. And so that was a big question for us as well. For climate and energy, we did combine some research requests here for infrastructure like wastewater and others to this category of climate and energy. There was requests for tools that could be used. So this is not just research that's published and done, but something that is dynamic and that can live so that cities can use this of saying, I'm going to do this policy intervention over here. Is there a way for me to understand the impacts that I might have across other programs and what that might do to it? Definitely flooding is an issue. Just anecdotally, I went to a housing investment conference, and even insurance just across the country are saying never before did they think just where it rains that it was a big flooding risk. And that's different now. And so I think this is also being picked up in local governments around the country who might not have been thinking about flooding before, but certainly are now. Um, Predictive technologies and forecasting for climate and sustainability. And I think hazards that are specific and thinking about mitigation. Transportation, this does include things like transit and other things, even though transit often belongs to a transit authority. So there's a lot of accessibility considerations, excuse me, with complete streets and traffic patterns. How can a local government better understand economic return and social health ROI for active transit and transportation networks? One of my favorite sort of research quotes for a research question was, help us make the case or benefits of some kind. And I think in this case, it would be like transit investments. And how can we kind of capture the economic ROI in addition to the policy outcomes that we want to see? Community engagement, we saw quite a bit. Really, this is sort of both in the short term, but in the long term, we had several workshops in communities that were undergoing the process for their long term plan. Some plans can be 10 to 20 years, and they wanted to think about feedback loops to continuously iterate with residents and develop trust over time. Um, and they also, one of my other sort of favorite questions that came up was really sort of intangible or what makes you proud to live here, and defining things like that of placemaking and a sense of belonging. Finally, in terms of the research questions, if that's why you're here and that's what you're curious about, to hand over to folks in your university colleagues, service delivery was a significant amount of our research questions. And I'm biased. I work for cities. I think these are very good in terms of thinking about how to either justify, invest, or explain what's going on with tax dollar investments. So, one is how can a local government understand who is missing from data collection generally? Comparative benchmarking framework with peer city data. I'll come back to that in a little bit, but I want to say across the board, cities and counties want comparative data to peer cities. When I ask the second question to specific places of who do you consider to be your peer city, it is all over the map. It is very subjective. Uh, and I have spoken to experts who feel actually, if you look at it from an objective point of view, that peer cities actually vary across certain policy domains or problems. And it's not always the same city that you should be looking to for certain specific questions. So, other questions here of understanding your investment in overhead departments, as those often get a lot of cuts but provide imperative critical infrastructure to perform as a city, and stabilizing revenue, especially as ARPA funds are starting to roll off in 2026. So, as I said, the report itself will publish 432 research questions. This is actually down from about, I think, 720 that we got total. Every single research question was vetted, organized underneath a sub policy domain. So when you see the report under housing, there will be the priority questions, but there will be a deep dive into things like zoning, permitting, individual economic mobility and levers at the city or county level, and things like that. So the other things that we really wanted to understand and study was, again, the ecosystem itself. It is without a doubt not enough just to publish an agenda. It could sit on a shelf and no one will do anything with it. We have to make sure the agenda is answered and get it to the right people, which is why I'm so delighted to be here at this webinar. And then it actually has to be answered. And then those answers need to go to the right person to effectuate those and to actually do something with it. So we are thinking of a whole of systems approach, and it is starting with a very critical job of publishing the research questions. So here are some of our results as we studied perceptions between cities and universities. We asked local governments to describe the word research with one word. And by far and away, the word data was used most frequently. We also heard white paper. And so there's a lot of perceptions of just publications, but we also got some descriptor words like in time intensive or slow, descriptions of high cost, grant funding, expensive. Positive descriptions included that it was objective, opportunity, and that it was knowledge based. When we asked university attendants to describe using one word public policy, we heard similar negative connotations, things like guardrails, structures, and rules. They also highlighted challenges, especially of its when cited, it is political, or a negotiation and exchange and relationship of what's happening there. Also, we're describing things that were slow and time intensive, but positive descriptions of public policy is that it is important and that it's working with change makers and you can do some really innovative things. When comparing the answers to both of these questions, ultimately the takeaway here is that research is seen as producing knowledge and public policy is seen as exercising power. So you can see here the description we really got from this exercise. Next, we asked what myth you want to bust. And this was really, how do you feel that you are perceived to this other, institution type of the room? Of from our local government staff, 21% feel that local governments are viewed as having a lot of money available and are themselves adequately resourced and have ample time to read large amounts of research. 20% that local government staff, the myth they wanted to bust, that local government staff are uninformed or not smart or not resourceful. 16% that they lack motivation, are lazy, or don't care and want to preserve bureaucracy. 13% that local governments cannot innovate and adapt, or they're hard to work with, and in particular, they resist academic insight. And 6% think that they're viewed as not data driven. On the university faculty side of the house, what myth do you want to bust? The most, by far and away, phrase that we heard was ivory tower or elite. And that I feel that even just sort of regularly working with universities in this role in MetroLab as a myth to bust. 19% that universities produce research that is impractical, unusable, theoretical. 15% that they only care about publishability and that faculty are perceived as not caring about their community. 11% that universities are slow or take time, that universities have a lot of money, and I might have skipped that, but basically both sides view like they feel like they are viewed as having money, and 11% that research only takes into account quantitative data. The core takeaway here is that university faculty and staff fear like they are being seen as too intellectual and disconnected, and local government staff fear as being seen as not intellectual enough. In our digital surveys, we asked what are the frequent barriers to research collaboration? So again, these are responses from local governments. The biggest trend I'll highlight for you as you may be reading the columns on the left is there really wasn't blaming universities. Like the local governments, and this is again from 167 respondents, mostly blame their own institution for not collaborating. First is lack of funding to support research collaborations. Second is lack of clearly designated leads, no culture or history of research collaborations. Excuse me. Challenges navigating city procurement or financial policies and lack of relationships are all very significant. We wanted to hone in on knowing who to work with because when MetroLab was started in 2015, it was the idea that a third party convener, intermediary, what have you, was necessary to help facilitate these types of partnerships. And we really wanted to test that and whether or not sort of membership organizations or conveners are still necessary today. And in short, it is very clear that they are. A substantial amount of people are just looking online on who to talk to, or they're just reaching directly with folks that they've already worked with. And you could see that it's very similar on both sides. It's hard to know who to work with unless you've already personally had a network or met someone at a convening. And so we really want to make the case to federal agencies and philanthropic funders alike that this is a necessary investment to make to get everyone in the same room. And to make clear, again, as I said, their answers were almost identical, and there's no clear structural discovery system on either side. There's nothing there to support that making. And we have serious concerns that we've created high barriers for newcomers into the space or to the university or to the city, which results in inequity of access and bottlenecks around well-connected individuals. We, in our digital survey, also asked in the knowing who to work with, do you have a front door to your local government so that a university could know who to work with? Larger population cities were not significantly more likely to say yes, that they have a central office, believe it or not. It was more or less consistent on medium to large size cities. The most common answer when asked if they had a centralized office was referring to multiple departments, to the no, de facto. Or they would refer to the mayor's office or head of your city manager, county manager, et cetera. 100% of our local government respondents said that a concise summary of results are necessary for them to use the work. It is very important or important. And 100% of respondents cited specific recommendations about their jurisdiction could use the results to use the results. In other words, it's not enough just to say cities should do this. The more you specify to Kate Burns in Arlington, Virginia should be doing this, the more impact it will likely derive. There are obviously exceptions to this, but this is if you're wanting to partner with counties and cities, likely even states, the more specific you can get to them, the more likely it will be read and used and enacted on. Um, Importantly, in this bold, my number one recommendation of anything, if you haven't taken anything from this presentation, is that research should have an audience in mind outside of the peer-to-peer review system. And the second is to go beyond observational and include recommendations on what to do. Other sort of recommendations or things that were cited on how to communicate with research. Again, specific insights from my jurisdiction. Um, Consideration of funding implications related to the research so that if you're recommending a giant unfunded mandate, it will be very difficult to get traction. Infographics and sort of graphic treatment is really well received, especially for folks who have low capacity. And lower on our ranking was a presentation of results to elected officials. I know that the mayor or county manager is the sort of shiny object, but you will go so far in working with staff that have the capacity to sit down with you and take that research into consideration. We list some other additional barriers. I won't go over all of them. I'd love to take questions and hear feedback. But things like identifying the problem statement early on and in partnership with local governments. We see that incentives and timelines are mismatched, that political cycles move faster than peer review cycles. Implementation is the missing middle. This goes to the observation that it needs to be a recommendation. And outputs should include what to do next, or what type of staff you should include, or sort of the timing, just more information on how to act. And then managing relationships and making sure that clear points of contact are considered. We saw also, this is going to the sort of macro level, as I mentioned at the beginning. Hugely problematic is that the research needs of cities and counties are not necessarily scientifically novel, which, as we all know, is a fundamental piece to federal funding grants. I'm mostly familiar with NSF, less so with NIH, and so you all might correct me here if that is considered differently with intellectual merit. But I will tell you that this data is scientific, it is novel to the jurisdiction who is asking for it. And so we hope to meet, go back to NSF, go back to members of Congress and make this observation to them. Uh, Philanthropic funding is considered differently with the R1 point system. This, I think, is something of importance, especially for urban universities who might be tutoring on R1 or R2. And that is something to be considered. Also thinking about tenure tracks and whether or not community engagement is taken into consideration as it is, as to any extent as publishing is. And this was important, and so I want to make sure to recognize this, that academics don't like to provide recommendations with certain degrees of certainty, and government decision makers do. I will also say that university and researchers are very process heavy. In our workshops, we asked the local government side, if you could get research on blank, what would you want? And we asked the university side, what research do you think that they need? And we had a lot of answers on the university side start with the word how. And we had answers on the local government side start with the word what. What is my problem? What is my answer? And the university just wanted, not just, but wanted to talk about the process on how to do something and how to consider it. Um, in terms of research outputs, the executive summary, so high demand across everyone that we talk to, and I'm hoping is easily attainable for folks to acquiesce to. Ideally, no technical jargon at all. It should, in fact, not be above an eighth grade reading level. Again, if you want to do toolkits and program designs, that would be great. And doing as much as we can to eliminate research paywalls so it's accessible. We have specific recommendations for local governments and universities, especially to build transformative partnerships in an ongoing and in perpetuity way. We will have in the report recommendations for general like project specific work as well. You can see here the list more or less summarizing what I've said so far, and I will add a nod to integrating the legal community so you can get all of your sharing agreements out of the way and done, ideally with the master agreement. I had mentioned the town gown program in the city of New York City. All of their contracts are publicly available. Go to the website for town gown and you can see how they issue their RFPs to the research community. They have a master agreement of which 14 universities are under, and then they just do task orders for each project. And the projects I think are around $80,000 to $120,000 per project. We also talked about the difference at the city of New York City of going to a consultant versus going to a university for certain work. And the three common areas are it's usually more technical. It has about an 18-month project life cycle, and a more neutral party is of interest. What's next for us? We really want to work on this problem of peer city benchmarking. It is just a huge opportunity for an organization to work on to explain who a city should be comparing themselves to. We also want to recommend, of course, that this pipeline be considered as infrastructure itself. And that will trigger, I think, a lot of things on the local government side on how to handle this. Some other observations of note during this project. Our hypothesis is that centers at universities are set up for success early on, that is the part of the university that treats research with an audience on the beginning. We note this because it's slightly problematic because centers often don't have reliable funding or they have to have diversified sources of funding. And if that is indeed the case, then we want to sort of go to Congress and support more centers at universities and federal funding. Success and partnership is incredibly relationship based. Master agreements are helpful. If I had to summarize the research needs, not using one of the 7 policy domains that I mentioned, it would be for evaluation and understanding if the policy intervention that the city or county is invested in is indeed doing the outcome that they wanted to see. Support to becoming more efficient and doing more with less generally, and viewing universities as ways to produce new sources of data. So again, our core takeaways are here, and the main barrier isn't misaligned goals, but coordination and infrastructure for collaboration. These are solvable problems that could unlock policy innovation if we tackled them. When we ask cities and counties, how can you support universities and vice versa in terms of being engines of innovation and economic growth, there is demand for evidence-based policy and data analysis. Local governments want universities as applied research partners, not just knowledge generators. There's a hunger to provide best practices quickly. Cities and counties are constantly looking for use cases of what is working. And they also specifically need help with convening. And I think that's what universities could do. They have networks and physical space and can serve as neutral conveners to cities or counties if you don't know where to start. On the flip side, faculty want local governments to bring them real problems to solve. They view local governments as problem generators, and universities want to know where the research demand exists. Again, collaboration structures are needed, not just individual relationships. And how can you, as an institution, start to provide the framework to do that. So this more or less concludes the preliminary findings of our work. We will be publishing in April. Right now we have April 7th, but don't tell my comms team that I told you that. And we want to create a research repository such that of the 400 plus research questions that we publish, if you have a publication that is less than 1 year old, we're going to have a form. We hope that you submit that to us. We want to create a repository for cities and counties across the country. We are going to be sticklers and recommend that the research you're giving us has to, in some way, appreciate the recommendations that we have, i.e., it should probably have an executive summary that is not jargony. And so that way we know where cities and counties can use it. Ultimately, we are rooting for science and we want to democratize research and get it inside communities. So thank you so much for this opportunity to share in my informal, not slideshow presentation. Love to discuss more.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I have questions kind of rolling in here in the Q&A as well as some Teams chats within the APLU staff. So I'm going to start with one from a member of our APLU staff that is kind of thinking about these success stories a little bit on where maybe some good has happened with the partnerships between universities and local governments. So they are curious if you have any stories of how institutions have successfully broadened outreach beyond just the mayor's office that doesn't cause any diplomatic incidents or threaten any prior partnerships. So I think connected to what you were saying about looking beyond maybe the mayor and council, the shiny objects, right? The people we associate with the city government, and thinking about how to connect with staff. Do you have any examples in the conversations you've had that might be some pathways for small, medium, large cities to move forward in that way?
Definitely. I think it depends on the nature of your work. If the nature of your work belongs to a department, so if you're working on housing, you can go to the housing department. I think it's a little more clear of who you'd want to work with. I always look for the data champion. So if your nature of your work doesn't belong to a department, I would go to the chief data officer. That's an excellent place to start. That person is likely working across departments on a day-to-day basis. Um, and so that's where you want to go. We also looked at like, what is the right time to reach out to someone? Is it, I don't have a project, I just want to be your professional friend? Yes, that's good. Is it, I've started a project and I want your input? Yes, also good. Local governments got a little more hesitant ish if you are just talking to someone by the time you're ready to publish, because then it's like there wasn't an opportunity to make it to ask maybe their specific questions or get more integrated in the community engagement process that they already have. So it should be early. I do think that the chief data officer or whoever is using data, or I also say this, it is the person who has the fire in their belly. The main point of contact at UMKC is my old law professor, and he would connect everyone across the university. Had no business doing that in the law school. So I think it's someone who just really feels, again, that like leaning into the fact that this is very relationship based and going from there.
Awesome. Thank you. Another question we have is, should academics be providing recommendations? What about the role of private consultants in this space? So I think about, this is likely connected to the portion where you're talking about being really specific about what the research means for the field. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I mean, I can certainly, sitting back for a moment, I can see the risk in providing recommendations, and I think that should be acknowledged. It could be seen as political, it could be seen as unscientific to do that recommendation. Um, and I guess in the current environment, that could be challenging, and it could be whatever sort of you're aiming to do. If you want to do a peer-to-peer review, it is unnecessary. If you want to do something and do research and get it out there in hopes to see change, it is absolutely necessary. unless that the observation is so obvious of like what someone should do for an intervention. But I think there is an existential question of what is the purpose of research, and is this notion of maintaining this sort of, I'm just a scientist, I just observe. There's a good, I think, healthy debate around that. So I acknowledge both sides, but I will say, I hope to advocate for more recommendations in a safer way. If that makes sense.
Yes, and I know this isn't my presentation, but I am thinking about that too of the researcher as that tool in some ways of being able to think and based on the data, how you're interpreting it, what some potential recommendations might be. Obviously,
Mhm.
others reading maybe that work might come up with different recommendations, but thinking of yourself as that instrument to provide some recommendations might be helpful to at least start moving in some direction
Yeah.
at that
And
moment.
and I will say, I think that another opportunity to address this issue is federal agencies have a lot of power. We work with the National Science Foundation on a program called Civic, which deploys $1 million in 12 months to a research project that has a community partner. One very good example that kind of comes to mind here is a project in Milwaukee that brought a microtransit service to connect jobs. Milwaukee is very racially divided, and the state doesn't allow for regional transit authority, and this filled a gap. The university found that if they gave surveys to the writers, ridership dropped. And so it was either they have to move forward with the research, and this won't work, or they have to reduce, like, kind of put at jeopardy the research component to see more people ride. And that's what they did. They dropped the survey. And it got picked up $4 million from the governor to continue on. And they found another way to sort of collect the data. It wasn't as thorough, but it was different. And that was a clear sort of conflict of what to do going forward. And I think that is the example here of moving forward with recommendations.
So thank you. Along the same lines of recommendations, we have one question here that says several of your recommendations take fiscal, human, or other resources, such as time, up front. How do we make the case on the university side, where resources are oftentimes very tight, about how this investment will pay off?
That's a great question. One, I would say it does take time and resources, but I think that there's low hanging fruit, and this is a really good recommendation to me to have a slide of the low hanging fruit that you can do today that you can start on. Um, I will say, like, not to get too heavy again, but I think that we are in a moment for universities as to like conversations about the ROI in universities in science and research, and this is certainly a way to demonstrate the tremendous value that universities are making. I'm not one that you need to convince of the tremendous value that universities have, but I do think that it is important. Generally, I just think from like a moral and societal piece to expose science a little more, to make it seem more accessible and to understand what it is. And does that take a diversion of funding from one program to another? Maybe. Is that a small investment in just sort of going to conferences and networking? Yes. I do think it is incumbent upon us at FAS to go campaign to federal agencies and provide the resources to universities because it's too big of an ask otherwise. And I think I'm hopeful that the evidence that we have now will justify investments to come from federal funding to do this.
Excellent. Thank you. Another question we have from our executive director here at USU. Jennifer says, yay for centers. However, they're often cut when soft money runs out. How do we create more support for centers as a lever for connection between universities and cities?
Um, Jennifer, thank you. Not a first time caller, first time, whatever the expression is.
Yeah.
That's a great question. I think there's some work to do here. Ideally, I actually think it's funded from the state, and that states can have some discretionary funding to give to universities to support centers and like put their money where their mouth is and invest in centers to and be a client of that center. And it could also work in the service of local governments. There are some smaller local examples of this. In Lane County, Oregon, with the University of Oregon, they pay a regular amount a year. I want to say $50 to $100,000 for the policy center to do work for the county itself, and it has done things. It has informed ballots. Hopefully, my audio didn't change there. It has informed ballots for transit and things of that nature, and so we know that that can be a way to go. But I don't honestly think anyone is, to my knowledge, at the national level, thinking about centers as an investment to make, and that's a narrative I think that we hope to change.
Thank you. Next question I have here, which I think is a interesting one as well from your perspective. Thanks for the preview of the survey results. What findings surprised you the most, and was there anything less prominent in the results that you might have expected, prior to conducting the survey?
It's another good question because it's not actually in the report. I was shocked. There was a question of uh, cities and counties doing research projects and how they currently are funded. And a large majority of them were funded by the city or county, which was shocking to me. And this whole sort of conversation and reality about whether or not we have money to fund research kind of was dispelled within our own survey of like people think we have money, but then the fact is they do have money to fund research. It's limited, but they do have some. It was much more than I thought. And I would say our partner who helped administer the survey, Kate Bender with Porchlight Insights, so she's a former colleague of mine at the city of Kansas City, was also shocked to see this. I also think that it matters uh, what like parts of the country you're in and how you view consultants. That I think is really interesting. I would love to understand the perceptions of consultants by cities and counties and sort of the holes that they fill when it's just coming to like knowledge gap questions and not necessarily like general reporting. Um, but yeah, I think that was the most surprising thing to me. I will say the thing that um, fills my brain a lot is the perception misalignment that researchers think they're seen as too like elite or intellectual, and local government staff think that they're not enough. And I would say both of those are wrong. And so in my letter of introduction, I say, may we view researchers as doers and local government staff as experts.
I like it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Um, the last question here, I think, just that I have, and maybe there's some more questions coming through. But this goes back to one of the original questions related to should consultants, what role should they play in the recommendations here? If there's anything additional you have to add to that, I know you talked a little bit about your view on what role researchers might play in that. The question here is, would it not be more appropriate for faculty researchers to stay within the lane of providing insights for policymaking decisions? So I don't know if there's anything additional you wanted to expand on that, and then I'll also ask the next question here that's um, from the same individual. Thoughts on modulation of indirect rates for federal grants when associated with these local government topics. So yeah, I'll just turn those over to you to see how you want to answer. The first one as a follow-up, and then the next question related to those indirect costs of research.
Yeah. So some specific things that were discussed in our workshops, going back to the recommendations piece, whether or not findings actually make recommendations and they are observations, there was a desire from the local government to have support from the research community through the entire process of not advocating because that feels political, but more or less like helping communicate to, for example, a city council body, a county administrative body, the findings, and sitting in chambers next to local staff to do that, or going to community meetings. And so learning about and being able to talk through the research with those outside of academic audiences, that was seen as attractive for several reasons. Namely, it gave a lot of credibility to what was ever happening. And I think that is something that is very true today, is that recommendation or observations, findings from research, when they are presented, are trusted. There's no In no time in our survey or in our community workshops was there any conversation of, I don't believe what you're telling me in terms of observations. And I think that should be noted, and that's really important. And there was an ask to, like, stay with me, university partner, as I go and talk to my community and to elected officials about this topic. I think indirect rates are a um, really important thing to address and talk about. I've seen some universities have a different, lower indirect rate when they're working directly with local governments. Of course, for land grant universities, creatures of the state, partnering with state agencies is much easier. They're all under the same system. But I think still there's something to be addressed under the um, the local government indirect rate. I have seen closer, I think, to like a 20 to 30% range of acceptability with indirect rates there.
Thank you. And I am just checking the chat here one more time, and my team's messages and things like that, just to make sure we have all the questions covered. But it looks like we do. So I would love to just turn it over to you for the last minute or two here, as we're thinking about
Yeah.
closing out the conversation today and thinking about the full report being released. What are some next steps that folks who are interested in this topic might take to? We talked a lot about the 400, 700 plus research questions.
Yeah.
I think it was 700, right, that got whittled down to
Distilled to,
400.
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
What are some next steps for folks on the call today as they're thinking about how to engage a little bit more with this and maybe dive into the full report?
That's a great question. One is, I truly hope folks disseminate this report. And we want it to be digestible, which is why we're going to break it up over the several policy domains. These research questions have to get in front of researchers. Whether you agree with our recommendations or not for projects in collaboration, we hope to get these questions answered. And that is priority number one. We also want to recognize that we did not do a survey or an other investigative primary research with the university community. And so we're talking to Jennifer and you, Jimmy, and hoping to find a way to understand better the university side of the house. So whether it be barriers for partnership, I think the recommendations question is the first thing I'm going to go tell my team about what I heard today. I think it's a really good point of sort of what are the things that we're saying that make people feel comfortable and empowered? What are things that make people feel nervous, and why? So I hope that we can continue the work on the university side. I hope that folks can reach out to us and let us know their thoughts regardless. And then the third thing is that we really want to go to federal agencies and members of Congress and champion these ideas and get funding out the door. The hope was that MetroLab, now at FAS, would serve as the third party connector. So hopefully we can issue a research challenge and institutions can answer, we can have funded opportunities to answer these questions. And then MetroLab would serve as the disseminator to the appropriate city or county that can enact it. Hopefully we can continue to get investments in networking and strengthen relationships. And then I would love to see us do this report again in 4 to 5 years and see how research questions and knowledge gaps are evolving.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And I see in the chat here too, we get some feedback about the recommendation for that symbiotic approach to bringing city folks and researchers to city council meetings and things like that is very helpful. I know that this is
Great.
not the last time that USU is going to engage with MetroLab at FAS about this report. I'm really excited to continue the conversation and for folks that are here with us, if you're looking for ways to get involved, you can always connect with us here at USU, and we'd be happy to connect you and Kate if you're looking to engage a little bit more. But I want to thank you so much for everyone for being here, but Kate, for sharing your knowledge today and giving us one of the first previews, it sounds like, to the survey results. We're very, very thankful. So wishing everyone the absolute best and looking forward to connecting in the future.
Thanks so much, Jimmy. Really appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.